My parents demand I help pay my sister's $180,000 debt after cutting me off for not pursuing medicine like her, but I helped double their debt for free. For context, my parents come from families where no one went to college. They always preached that education was the only way out of poverty. When I was born, they had my life planned. I'd be a doctor, not just any doctor, a surgeon. They mapped out my entire timeline from kindergarten to medical school. My sister, born 5 years later, got the same treatment. Growing up felt like living in a pressure cooker. My dad quizzed me on anatomy books at 8 years old. My mom enrolled me in every science camp and math tutoring session they could afford. By high school, I knew more about the human circulatory system than most seniors knew about anything. But here's the thing, I was good at art, really good. I could draw realistic portraits at 10. My landscapes stopped people in their tracks. When I showed my work to my parents, Dad would glance at it and say, "Nice, now study for your chemistry test." Mom hung 1 or 2 pieces on the fridge but never really looked at them. In high school, my art teacher said I had real talent and should consider art school. She even offered to help build my portfolio. I brought it up at dinner that night. Silence for 30 seconds. Then Dad put down his fork and said art was a hobby, not a career. They reminded me I'd already been accepted into a pre-med program at the state university, non-negotiable. My sister was different. She genuinely loved medicine. She won the state science fair 3 years running. My parents loved showing her off to relatives and neighbors. She was everything they wanted me to be. The breaking point came in my 3rd year of college. I was taking organic chemistry, physics, and anatomy simultaneously. My GPA dropped to 2.8. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and my roommate found me passed out in the library twice in 1 week. I called home and told Mom I needed a semester off. She immediately put Dad on, who asked if I was on drugs. I said no, I just needed time to think, maybe explore other options. "What other options?" he asked. I took a deep breath and said I wanted to transfer to art school. I'd been accepted into 3 programs. Dead silence. Then Mom said they needed to talk in person. I drove home that weekend, expecting a long discussion. Instead, they sat me down and gave an ultimatum. Return to pre-med or they'd cut all financial support, tuition, car insurance, health insurance. They'd also stop speaking to me until I came to my senses. I tried explaining I could get art school scholarships, showed them my portfolio and acceptance letters. Dad flipped through it silently, then handed it back. Mom said I was throwing my future away for finger paintings. I had $3,000 saved from summer jobs. That Monday, I dropped all my classes. That was 6 years ago. I haven't spoken to my parents since. I transferred to art school with a partial scholarship and worked to cover the rest. Despite their warnings, I've done fine. Last year, I was promoted to creative director, earning $75,000 annually, not doctor money, but enough for me. My sister and I stayed in touch on social media early on. She'd update me on her med school applications. I'd share my latest projects. But we drifted apart. She got into med school when I graduated from art school. My parents threw her a huge party. I saw the photos on Facebook. 2 weeks ago, my parents showed up at my door. I opened it but didn't invite them in. They said they'd made a mistake and wanted to talk. They admitted they were wrong to give me an ultimatum and should have supported my art. Then Dad said something that grabbed my attention. They'd been going through a tough time and could use family support. "What kind of tough time?" I asked. Mom glanced at Dad, then said my sister was struggling in med school. Just stress and adjustment issues, nothing serious. I asked how they found my address after 6 years of no contact. Dad said they hired someone to track me down. The conversation lasted maybe 20 minutes. They asked if I'd consider dinner the next weekend. I said I'd think about it. The next day, I called my cousin, who's close to my sister's age and used to be tight with her. I asked if he knew about her med school struggles. Turns out it wasn't just adjustment issues. She flunked out last semester. Not just bad grades, she was caught cheating on her final exams. She got expelled and reported to the state medical board. banning her from ever reapplying to med school. She moved back in with our parents, hasn't left the house in 3 months, sleeps until noon and plays video games. I'm no doctor, but that sounds like severe depression. Our parents are devastated. They'd bragged to everyone about their doctor-to-be daughter, and now they have to explain why she's living in their basement with no degree or future. That's why they're suddenly interested in me. I'm the only kid who graduated college, even if I'm not a doctor. That's why I don't want to reconnect. I get my sister's breakdown, I lived it too, but I escaped their pressure. I'm not going back. Update 1. I thought ignoring them was enough, but 3 days after my first post, they showed up at my office. Mom said she had no idea I was so successful. Dad asked about my salary and whether I owned or rented my apartment. I stayed behind my desk and asked what they wanted. Dad said they expected me to call after our last talk. Since I didn't, they tried again. Mom showed me photos of my sister lying in bed. Then Dad pivoted, saying they'd been thinking about my offer to help financially. What offer? I said, I'd never offered anything. Dad looked confused, saying he thought my success was for helping family in need. He mentioned struggling to pay my sister's $180,000 student loan debt. Despite not graduating, the debt remained. I said I wouldn't help with any loans. They argued they'd sacrificed so much for my education, and they weren't leaving empty-handed. But they opposed my art studies, so it wasn't fair to demand anything now. Dad said back then I was making bad choices, and they needed to teach me a lesson. Now my sister needed help, and I was the only one who could provide it. I asked them to leave my office. They did, but only because they were giving me time to think it over. That weekend, my sister called, the first time I'd heard her voice in 3 years. She didn't directly ask, but mentioned her stress over the debt and how hard it was to find work without a degree. I asked what really happened in med school. She said she'd been struggling for 2 years but was scared to tell our parents. The coursework was harder than expected, and she was failing classes but trying to catch up. In her last semester, she panicked and cheated on her final pathology exam, copying another student's answers. The professor caught her, and she was reported to the academic board. She knew she'd ruined everything but couldn't bear disappointing our parents, who'd invested so much money and bragged about her becoming a doctor since she was 5. Then she said something that pissed me off. Our parents calculated I could pay $2,000 monthly toward her debt. I told her I wasn't paying anything. She cried, saying she understood but didn't know what to do. She said our parents were furious and barely spoke to her. I asked if she wanted to meet without our parents knowing. She agreed. She shared more details about post-expulsion. Our parents told everyone she'd graduate med school, even planning a big party. They told most people she was taking a sabbatical for health reasons, but some relatives learned the truth. She said our parents blamed her for shaming the family and wasting their money. Dad took a second mortgage to help pay for med school. Then came the bombshell. My parents had been talking about me for months before showing up at my place, planning their approach, rehearsing their pitch, with Dad writing key points on paper. They had backups. If I refused to help financially, they'd contact my coworkers to publicly shame me into helping. I asked why she was telling me this. She said she was tired of their manipulation and regretted how they treated me 6 years ago. But something felt off. I tested her honesty by calling and saying I was considering helping with a small part of her debt, a lie, but wanted to meet our parents first to discuss. She got nervous, saying it wasn't a good idea. They were too stressed to handle it. She suggested sending money directly to her. That was all I needed to know. I told her I'd changed my mind about helping. She got mad, said I was just like them, caring only about money and success, and hung up. 3 days later, my cousin called. Our parents were asking relatives for money to cover my sister's loans, saying I refused to help my own sister and asking if others could chip in. They told my aunt I earned 6 figures but wouldn't give a cent. From what I know, no one's willing to help. It's not just a few $1,000s. I used to feel sorry for my sister, but seeing she's like them, I don't anymore. Update 2. My parents' harassment is bordering on ridiculous. They've started showing up at places I go outside work, like my gym. Dad got on the treadmill next to mine, talking about how disappointed he was in my attitude, saying it was just a little money. I turned off the treadmill and walked away. He followed me to the locker room, saying they weren't asking for charity, just family support. He claimed if the roles were reversed, they'd help me without hesitation. But the roles were reversed and they cut me off, so that was their best lesson. Dad said it was different. They knew I'd be fine, but my sister's debt was out of control, with interest piling up too fast. I left the gym saying I knew she'd be fine too. A big lie. 3 days later, they were waiting by my car after work. The loan payments were $2,400 a month, and they couldn't cover it on their income. I asked why my sister couldn't get a job to help. Mom said she was still recovering from depression and wasn't ready to work, needing time. If I paid for a while, she could get back on her feet without pressure and they wouldn't need more. Dad said they'd considered bankruptcy, but student loans can't be discharged that way. The debt would haunt them forever. Their house was already double mortgaged for her education. Then Dad said something that showed how far they'd go. They'd consulted a lawyer about their options, who suggested they could sue me for abandoning family obligations. I said I wasn't a lawyer or accountant, so I didn't know about that, but it wasn't my problem. Dad said they were exploring options, which sounded like a threat. Since I was successful and they were a trio of debtors, they were looking to force me to pay for my upbringing. I called it ridiculous and left, but it bothered me enough to research at home. No, they can't sue me for being raised, but they might try for the early college costs they covered. My sister started texting me multiple times a day, saying she was having panic attacks over the debt and couldn't sleep, sending me bank statements showing what she owed. I blocked her after she texted that she was considering self-harm if the financial pressure didn't stop. It felt like emotional manipulation to make me responsible for her mental health. I'm not playing their game. If they sue, I'll use my money to counter-sue for whatever I can. It's not my fault they were bad parents. Update 3. My cousin called with more info. Our parents were telling relatives my sister was suicidal over her student debt, claiming I could easily fix it but chose not to. Some family members started taking sides. My sister's situation garnered sympathy, while my refusal was seen as cold and selfish. A few relatives offered small contributions, but it wasn't enough. My cousin revealed something that explained a lot. Our parents had been living beyond their means for years. The second mortgage wasn't just for med school, it covered credit card debt and their lifestyle. They'd counted on my sister becoming a doctor to support them financially. That's when I decided to stop playing defense against their manipulation and go on the offensive. I sent a detailed email to relatives, urging them not to help my parents, as it would only feed their financial black hole. My dad's older brother called the next day, saying he'd lent them $15,000 2 years ago, never repaid. He suspected they'd borrowed from multiple relatives without intent to repay. He planned to talk to others to tally how much they'd borrowed. He thought it was far more than anyone realized. 3 days later, he called with shocking news. My parents had borrowed from at least 8 relatives over 3 years, totaling over $100,000, none repaid. They told each lender a different story: medical bills, home repairs, and swore them to secrecy so no one knew the full extent. The family planned to confront my parents. My sister's student loans were just the latest crisis they used as an excuse. The confrontation happened last weekend at a family party I didn't attend. Relatives brought up the loans. My parents first denied borrowing so much, then said they'd repay everyone once my sister became a doctor. When relatives pointed out she wouldn't be a doctor, Mom broke down, saying they didn't need reminding. My parents left early as the family demanded their money. Yesterday, I learned my parents sued me, claiming I owe them for expenses after I abandoned pre-med, demanding $50,000, more than any actual debt, for emotional damages. I met with a lawyer this morning who said the lawsuit has no legal basis and will likely be dismissed soon. But it might not end there, and our best defense is to countersue for legal costs. That's my life now. Edit. To clarify, my parents spent $7,500 on my education while I was in pre-med. The rest were loans in my name which I've paid off. Their demand for $50,000 is not only baseless but absurd. Their loss in court will be my choice of absurdity. Update 4. The lawsuit was dismissed 3 months ago as my lawyer predicted. The judge warned my parents about the claim. But they hired another lawyer and appealed, amending their suit to include defamation, alleging my email to relatives damaged their community reputation. More on that later. My cousin kept me updated. Unable to get family money, my parents tried other sources. My sister started a crowdfunding campaign for her student loans, claiming she was forced to leave med school due to a family crisis and faced overwhelming debt. It didn't mention her expulsion for cheating. The page raised about $3,000 in 2 weeks, mostly from strangers. But someone who knew the truth commented about her expulsion, and the page was deleted the next day. Some relatives are discussing suing my parents for their unpaid loans, including interest, and want repayment now. The appeal hearing happened last week. My parents brought my sister as a character witness. The judge listened for 10 minutes before stopping them, saying the case was baseless and clearly meant to harass me. He dismissed the appeal and ordered them to pay my legal fees. Outside court, Dad approached, saying things had spiraled and we could settle privately for $20,000 to end it. I reminded him they'd lost and had no leverage. My lawyer added $6,000 in legal fees to their debt, with collectors ready to pursue. He said if they try more lawsuits, we could sue for harassment and take far more than $6,000. He's confident he could own their asses for eternity if they push it. My parents are losing their house. The combination of my sister's loan payments, existing debts, and legal costs has made the mortgage untenable. My sister got a part-time retail job at minimum wage. The three are pooling salaries to rent an apartment. I hope they sue again. My lawyer's more eager than I am. They'll likely face the relatives' lawsuit, so they won't have time for me. Edit. My parents are being sued by relatives for unpaid loans. Not all are joining. One relative doesn't want to kick them while they're down. The rest hired a lawyer. Between my legal fees, loans, interest, and this new case, my parents could owe over $200,000. You could say I doubled their debt by messing with me. All it cost me was an email clarifying their lies. Update 5. My parents confessed to my aunt, who told my cousin, who told me, and now I'm telling you. They owe $125,000 after losing the family's class action lawsuit. That's after paying some debt and selling their house. The original debt, minus the house's value, was likely over $250,000. They've got a long road to clear the rest. My sister moved out alone. My parents got a 1-bedroom apartment to afford monthly payments. My sister wants nothing to do with them, unwilling to take on their debt. She didn't borrow from relatives, sign for the student loan, or sue me. Her karma is a minimum wage job and parents who resent her for not becoming a doctor, which would have solved their problems. In that alternate timeline, they'd live happily ever after despite what they did to me. But in this one, they're stuck with debt forever. I prefer this timeline.